We're down to the wire with only 2 months left until Koreans head to the ballot box to choose who will represent them in the 22nd National Assembly for the next 4 years. The elections are widely seen as a referendum on President Yoon, as well as an outlook on his chances of pushing through his policies in his third year in office, so essentially defining the latter half of his term. This is why rival parties are gearing up for what is expected to be a fierce competition. That might be an understatement. We dive deeper with Adam joining us on the line. Good morning.
Good morning and happy Lunar New Year holiday.
That's right. It's the last leg of a long weekend. I'm sure our listeners, especially locals, are trying to pave their way back to reality. And we all need a little bit of information updates when we're on a long commute, a long drive back.
Yeah, so we had January 1st, the New Year, and now a Lunar New Year holiday. So holiday hangovers all over the place.
I hope you'll recover.
Barely.
It's a funny thing because we began talking about the prelude and the lead up to the general election since last year. We said it's going to be an important election year, namely for us, for the upcoming general elections locally and the U.S. presidential election. So we thought this might be an appropriate time to get all of our listeners caught up. What's to happen? What's expected in 2 months' time? So let's begin with an election overview, Adam. I think that's a safe place to start. When is the vote exactly taking place, and what should voters know?
Right. So just to get the basic information out of the way, this year they will be held on April 10th, all the way from the morning to the evening. And it is basically a national holiday, if you will. So, yeah, a lot of people will be off work during that day. 300 seats, as usual, are up for grabs in Parliament. You have to be over 18 to vote. And also, if you are a non-Korean citizen registered in the relevant local constituency and who has had a resident visa for at least 3 years, has the right to vote. So just because you are here on a visa doesn't mean you are not eligible to vote. So you still have the right to vote. You just have to have had a resident visa or longer for 3 years. Now, the parties fighting for majority are, of course, the ruling People Power Party, the Democratic Party, Green Justice Party, Basic Income Party, Progressive Party, New Reform Party, and the New Future Party, as well as independents, of course. Now, the two major parties, be the PPP and the DP, those and another party, which we'll be discussing in a moment, those are the ones that a lot of people will be putting their eyes on. Now, the ruling PPP is determined to reshape the composition of the current assembly, dominated by its liberal rival, the DP. So it wants to take the majority away from them. The opposition, DP, meanwhile, is determined to maintain its dominance in Parliament as a counterbalance, of course, to the governing party and the Yoon administration as well.
Okay, so there's been a lot of talk about the rules of this year's elections. The PPP, the ruling party, wants to use a parallel voting system. The DP, using its majority, decided last week to unilaterally maintain the current system of allocating proportional seats with a status quo. As you've said on the program before, Adam, the election is projected to be very similar to that of 4 years ago. So run us through the differences and how they could affect the elections.
Yeah, so we kind of did a brief an overview or a summary last time on Keyword News. I'm going to get a bit technical here. I'll try and explain to the best of my ability to try and keep it simple as possible. A lot of electoral kind of systems involved. But yes, the DP chair, Lee Jae-myung, was given authority to decide on the rules of this year's elections and he chose to stick with the semi-mixed member proportional representation system, or MMPR system for short. So it was introduced first back in the 2020 general elections to ensure fair representation for minor parties in Parliament by allocating a certain number of seats to their lawmakers, 47 to be precise. However, it has been criticised for encouraging major parties to establish several satellite parties, or these paper parties, which was the case in 2020. At that time, the satellite parties of the two major parties secured 36 of the 47 seats initially allocated for minor parties by the system. So the minor parties who ran in the election back then only won 8 of such seats in total. So not really adhering to the kind of goal of better representation for them in parliaments. And also, the system was also deemed to be extremely complex and confusing. So if you're confused by the end of this, well, you've proved my point. Now, it ties parliamentary seats to the percentage of voters' support for parties and involves a complex calculation. Now, Korea's current system is called semi-MMP because the rules apply to only 30 out of the total 47 proportional seats at a 50% ratio. Already it's happening. The PPP and other minor parties have called for a return to the so-called parallel representative system. That's where voters can cast separate ballots for constituency seats, counting them separately from votes for parties. Now, last week, the EU's decision has sparked even more tensions, of course, between the two major parties because of that very issue. As expected, the DP will create a satellite party, as will the PPP to counter, although they're not happy about it. So basically the question is, how will minor parties fare? They'll certainly be weighing the pros and cons. They certainly have a better chance of grabbing the proportional seats. But, of course, the satellite party tactic is becoming, or will become, a major obstacle as it had been last time round in 2020. And, of course, to offset that risk, minor parties may choose to form a single umbrella party, if you will, to challenge the rival parties' candidates. And so, yeah, it's going to be more of the same kind of system and affair that we had 4 years ago. So we'll have to see how well it plays out this time around.
So a coalition is expected essentially, but who will side with who and who merges with whom, that becomes a complicated question. Can we steer away from the same old from 4 years ago if there is some pros to come out of it? We'll have to wait and see. And you're right. You probably lost half of my listeners.
I apologize.
It's very complex.
But I tried to keep it as simple as possible.
How about this, Adam? Because you covered that in such great detail leading up to the American presidential election. I'll explain the Electoral College.
Thank you. I think because of course the British system is different as well. I've tried to dive into the details of the Electoral College, and it still bewilders me. So you could try, but I'll still go over my head.
Saved for another day. So let's talk about some campaign developments in the general elections. It's hard to forget the brazen attack on the DP chair. There have been some key developments, including but not limited to it. It's not just limited to the attack on Lee Jae-myung. There was another attack on Bae Hyun-jin as well. There was, of course, other shifts, like you alluded to, third parties, satellite parties. So let's start with the new parties and how they plan to shift the political landscape.
Right. So, yes, we mentioned satellite parties. They're kind of tactics utilized by the two major parties, as I said, to take an advantage or exploit, as some critics pointed, of the semi-mixed or semi-MMP system. But there is a side of this political development where there is a completely new parties being made by kind of defectors of these major parties. Now, Lee Jun-suk, for example, the former leader of the PPP, has established a new party. He left the ruling bloc after clashes with older members of the party. He has also been very critical of President Yoon, which has, of course, frayed his relations with the top office. This bled into in-party fighting between pro-Yoon and anti-Yoon factions. It's not new, but it has kind of exacerbated the situation. He is being touted by some political pundits as kind of being a wild card in the upcoming election because of his popularity with young voters especially. Now, these issues are also evident on the other side of the aisle. Lee Nak-yeon, the former Prime Minister and former leader of the DP, is also set to establish a new party. He, like Lee Jun-suk, has also had some political heavyweights by his side. He says he wants to give hope to the despairing public and aims to be the largest party in the general election. So quite an ambitious goal of trying to overtake the PPP and DP. Now, Lee Nak-yeon has fiercely competed with Lee Jae-myung, calling for his resignation, and believes that the various scandals and lawsuits related to the current DP leader are a liability for the party. So there's been some in-party fighting because of that reason as well. So the cited reasons for vote defections is the public's poor perception of the two major parties. Now, both leads want to take advantage of that, but it remains to be seen, of course, if they will have any chance in changing the public view. Now, we saw past cases of this that hasn't worked out so well. Past party splits like Anto Su's iterations of the People Party, for example, demonstrate that new parties are unlikely to kind of upend the two-party system that's already in place. It remains to be seen whether other prominent defectors join the new camps and whether the two new camps merge to create a third pillar of the Korean party system. That's something that's been most likely being predicted as happening. Now, the Korean public seem kind of tired of the main parties and, in-house fighting and stubborn resistance to reform. But they're also not very keen on the establishment of new parties, as, of course, it could create more confusion when casting votes as well. So already in Korean political elections, it's the voters' kind of consensus is that it's a choice of two evils. But if you have another party from prominent members of those two major parties, well, now some people are saying that it's maybe a case of choosing the lesser three evils. So we'll have to see how it proceeds in the April election coming up.
It's stuck in a rock and a hard place. Why do I have a feeling that that's sort of a consensus in high-stakes elections across many other polarized political spectrums? It's not just limited to Korea. I don't want to continuously bring up the U.S. presidential election, but the narrative there seems quite similar, right?
Yeah, I mean, any major, probably not just limited to major economies, but I guess all politicians in most countries and the public have a similar kind of perception. In the UK as well, when voting for parties, of course, the prime minister, the leader of that party becomes prime minister. It's a similar story, basically. So I think it's just politics in general on a global scale, right?
That's a mouthful. But this is perhaps why we have usually Q News on a daily basis. If you don't decipher the policies on a deeper level, you wouldn't know which way to swing. And it's about making those hard decisions. Another major development we discussed on our program before are the series of brazen attacks on major politicians, including one against the DP chair and the PPP lawmaker, Bae Hyun-jin. This has rattled politicians as they head into campaign season and they get closer to the public, more prone to security threats. So it's prompting a conversation on heightened security.
Yeah, so the most recent one was Pae, who was attacked by a rock-wielding 14-year-old boy, interestingly, roughly 3 weeks after Lee Jae-myung was stabbed in Busan. This has prompted politicians from both sides of the aisle to kind of share messages in unity and unanimously condemning the use of violence against politicians. They've also stressed the need for measures to prevent copycat crimes. However, despite the unified condemnation, he seems to place blame on President Yoon. So the political mudslinging continues. Now, after recovering, he accused Yoon of promoting divisive politics and worsening an already toxic discourse in the nation. Pae has also finished surgery and has pledged to get rid of what she called political hatred, whether that was a swipe at E or the opposition party, only she knows. Now, this to bring about the questions of heightened security in campaigning. There's been discussions with the National Police Agency and the ruling party on upping the personnel and security personnel police as well for politicians. That in itself has sparked some sort of criticism, saying, well, politicians feeling a bit entitled, and why should they get more security than the regular Jane and Joe and things like that. And but of course, in campaigning, these politicians are out on the streets pretty much face-to-face with the public. So they are prone to such attacks. So, yeah, I mean, this has sparked a whole load of other questions as well. But, of course, any violence in any scenario is bad overall.
And minimizing the risk should always be prioritized. But I think to that criticism, maybe we can add one more point. I mean, it is the idea we don't have unlimited personnel with the police or security agencies, right? I mean, we're talking about a potential vacuum in some cases. Will protection elsewhere have to be minimized to protect politicians? I think that's a sticky point too.
Yeah. I mean, that's not just between the public and the politicians, but between the politicians running as well. Well, there might be some kind of, some bad blood and some jealousy all going on, saying, well, I've only got 2 officers by me. Why does he get 10? Or why does she get, 15? So
I didn't even go that far. Okay.
Yeah, but there's that kind of question as well. So,
all right.
A whole load of questions involved in this.
Only one thing is agreeable from that takeaway, zero tolerance to violence. How we go about protecting these high-profile politicians, that's still being debated. All right. I know, Aram, you don't have a crystal ball to look into the future, and I don't expect all of the answers, but let's talk about some of the expectations. There have been a lot of developments and variables, like the ones we mentioned today. How much, if any, will these play a factor in determining the results of the April vote?
That is the question, isn't it? And only if we knew. But of course, it's hard to predict who will be favourites to win, especially this year, as various opinion polls show no particular party or no particular person or candidate holding a comfortable lead. But it is, of course, still early days. For example, the polls conducted in December show that 35% of 1,000 respondents were still undecided on who to vote for. Now, that 35%, of course, can mean the win or loss of a certain party or candidate. Now, on top of that, prominent politicians such as Lee Jun-suk and Lee Na-kyun are, as I said, creating their own respective parties to challenge the traditional two-party race. The whole point of them doing so is to shake up the status quo. Whether they'll be able to achieve that, of course, remains to be seen. But the chances so far are looking a bit slim. Now, recent polls show that only 18% of people are willing to vote for a new party created by the former PPP leader, while 20% express support for the DP's leaders group. So it's still relatively low percentages for the time being, but of course, official kind of campaigning hasn't really begun at the moment, so we'll have to see how successful they are on the campaign trail. Meanwhile, there is one possible indication, a very slim one though, that the ruling party is not doing so well, and that is a loss in a crucial local by-election that happened in the Kangsa ward about half a year ago. But it's still, of course, too early to say that is a prediction of what's to come, and a lot can happen in 3 months as well. And of course, that's only one section of dozens of wards up for grabs.
Who says we has 3 months? We have 2 months now.
Oh, sorry, 2 months. If I could do my math properly.
It happened fast. I know.
Yes, it seems like there was some space now, but of course we are in the thick of it at the moment. So yeah, only a couple of months left until the election. So still, a lot can happen. A lot can happen even with just a week left until the election. So we've seen cases where with only a week left, it's swayed from one way to the other. Now, one thing that has been a trend, though, especially in these parliamentary elections in Korea, is that it's rare for the ruling party to gain a majority because it is essentially a litmus test for the president and the ruling party. And, of course, they are on the chopping block and often face more scrutiny because they are the ones pushing for the policies, because they are the ones in office, in power, after becoming the governing body. If the president and ruling party are basically not pleasing the public, then the public will side with those who are opposed to them. So basically, they might not be happy with the opposition, but they're happy with the fact that someone's opposed to the ones who are pushing the policies and making and calling the shots. Now, President Yoon has been suffering from low approval ratings, so now it's a question of whether he is able to turn that around with the ruling People Power Party before voting takes place.
I mean, it seems high stakes for the president and the governing body, as this means it might single-handedly define what's to be expected for the president's third year and the latter half of his term.
Yeah, so we saw with the last election as well. I mean, of course, the opposition party, they utilized the MMP system to gain the majority. So I think they're believing that this time round, well, it's a question of, if it's not broken, then don't fix it kind of analogy where, they decided, although it is unpopular to keep with the status quo because it worked for them before, so maybe they're pinning their hopes that it's going to work for them again. But of course, with the emergence of these new parties trying to challenge these two major parties, and with President Yoon and the ruling party kind of suffering relatively lower approval ratings, we'll have to see. There's just so many questions involved and so many different variables that may determine the outcome of the results. So I'm digressing, but basically, it's hard to tell, is basically what I'm trying to say.
You could have ended that last question with just 3 words, hard to tell.
Yeah.
And add 3 more, wait and see.
Wait and see, yeah, exactly. But overall, but one important thing is, of course, is that we don't really know how things are going to play out unless the public go out to vote. So
Of course.
if you do have the right to have a say in your constituency or who represents you in Parliament, then go out and do so. Don't complain in the background. Go and vote.
Exercise your right. Thank you so much, Anna, for today's coverage. Happy holidays. We'll see you soon.
You're very welcome. Happy New Year, and I'll see you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.